Hi everybody, we're going to be very quick here, so we are, because we realise time is going on and Belfast rush hour can be a bit mad after 4 o'clock. Really, this is just a closing session to reflect on contributions that have been made throughout the day, particularly in the workshops, and how we move forward. What are the creative approaches in trying to deal with reparations and remedying the past in Northern Ireland? And so we're lucky to have Brandon here today to speak on this, who has worked a lot in a number of countries on reparations, and his stuff is very well renowned internationally, and how dealing with process and how we actually get to achieve reparations beyond just a legal understanding. So I'll hand over to Brandon.
Right, well, thank you very much. I am conscious it's very late, so thank you for those of you who chose to stay. We appreciate it. I've tried to curtail what I was going to say so that we can speed things up. It's also been quite a difficult task in that I got to listen to the feedback of all of the groups during the lunch break, and there's a huge amount of information on a whole lot of different subjects, so it's incredibly hard to try and summarize that. And secondly, I was asked to try and provide a sort of roadmap, to quote Tony Blair, of a road forward. What might we do in terms of taking this discussion forward? And it seemed from the groups and from what's been talked about here, a lot of issues were raised, but there hasn't really been a completely clear steer of like what happens next. So I don't actually have a massive amount of information to go on, so I don't want to promise a sort of golden silver bullet here that I know exactly the route that needs to be taken. So what I've tried to do instead is highlight just what I've heard in terms of the 10 key issues. And then through the organizers, maybe they can look at how can they take these 10 issues forward as a sort of list of priorities that seem to have come out of this workshop. So that's the approach that I have taken, and I will try to rattle through those as fast as I can. The first one of those you've heard a lot about, which is the issues of acknowledgement and apologies. So I'm not going to rehearse the arguments of what makes a good apology, what makes a good acknowledgement. Suffice to say, there's a lot of international work on this, and I know that Kieran is also working on a report which will be out on that area soon. But I think our first area that seemed to just be coming up a lot and spontaneously is around acknowledgement and apologies, and a lot of work needs to go into that. So I think that's the first area. And there were a number of interesting issues raised in the groups that were fed back to me. For example, how would you mediate an apology? How do you help somebody to make an apology? Which I thought was sort of an interesting thing. Is that possible? Maybe, maybe not. The gaps between organizational apologies and individual apologies. So there's a fortune of stuff. The second issue that didn't come up so much in this last session, but certainly came up in the feedback from the groups, was around pensions and the need for financial support. And not only the proposals that families representing those who have been injured have put forward, but also the increasing urgency of this in the sense of people are dying, the current austerity problems with welfare, a whole range of other issues. And so there were really, really big issues were fed back to me during the lunch break. The third is around the individual notion of victimhood, and that people have multiple needs. None of this is new to all of you in the room, but that there are multiple needs, the differentiation between victims, and if some type of strategy around reparations is to be developed, it will need to take into account a table of options and different options catered for different needs. And that poses really serious and difficult policy-related questions which need to be considered. The fourth area, which was sort of mentioned but not really developed, and again there's work to look at internationally, was around the idea of education as a potential component to reparations, and how might that look as someone who's employed in an educational institution, and knowing, for example, in a context like Chile, where families of the disappeared got free education and increasing squeeze on education, that's something that I think we should be considering and looking at as a serious issue. Number 5 is the whole area of symbolic reparations, which something like apologies would actually fall under, but the way I heard it in the feedback was more around the issue of memorials, memorialization. John also mentioned some of those issues. One of the issues which came up, people had different views, was the idea of a shared memorial, but maybe this is something worth talking about and having a look at. At the same time, there was a lot of skepticism about the idea of symbolic forms of reparation, and also recognition that the context we live in actually negates against some of those memorial processes, the types of divisions that already exist, but maybe an area worth exploring. The next area was, which was raised a little bit, not massively, but was around alternative processes, the use of art, theatre, those type of strategies were raised. The next one was raised several times, which was to really look at how do we widen the frame of reparations, how do we consider gender issues, how do we consider victims across the water, Republic of Ireland, issues of masculinity, how do we have a frame which recognizes reparations as a wider issue. The other point that I jotted down, which I only really heard once, but what about the role of carers in reparations processes? I think that's quite a novel thing, and it's not actually dealt with in a lot of other contexts. So some interesting things about widening that frame that I think if we try to draw up a strategy, we need to be thinking about. I can't even read my own handwriting here. The need for more international learning. A number of people raised those questions. I know Louise touched on it in the end. What does collective reparations need? What does it mean? In the feedback I got in the groups, there were people saying, what does collective reparations mean? So there's clearly a need for more learning about this and looking at really concrete examples of how they operationalize different strategies in different countries might be useful. Raised very briefly by Mr. White, I think, was the issue of principles. So I think there might be some work to do about what might be the underlying principles of a reparations strategy. So that could be something we could do some practical work on. And then I think the second last point, what was quite clear was that reparations is one component of dealing with the past. And although we focused on that today, it was really reiterated that, you can't have reparations without truth and justice and wider forms of accountability. And one of the things we're lacking right now is a proper commitment to how to deal with the past. So we're not going to solve the reparations debate if it's not put into a wider framework, and it's not about trying to not do this whole process in a piecemeal approach. So maybe I should have said that first, because in a way, that's really the critical issue. Unless you've got a dealing with the past framework, this is just going to be another little piece on the side. So we need to be thinking about it in a more holistic way. And then the final point was really around that I heard people talking about needs at different levels of what needed to be done. Politicians needed to be engaged in responding to proposals that are put forward to them. The Victims Forum needs to be taking forward different issues. Forums like this and academics and community groups need to be looking at issues. So there was a call for, I think, a different sectors of society to be engaging in this debate differently. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that was my best attempt at trying to just summarize some of the key issues that I heard. And I'm going to leave it to Luke to figure out what the strategy is and how we address those 10 issues.
I'll have that done by 5 o'clock today, thanks. Thank you, Brandon. Really, I'm just going to close it up now. We've got evaluation forms in all the packs, okay, and I really appreciate if you've got any further thoughts to note them there. Today, at the start, I said, what's been missing about this conversation from dealing with the past has been this notion of reparations. I think today we've started this conversation of how we try to think about remedying the past. And we've really appreciated all your inputs, through your questions, through your ideas that come up in the workshops, and for your attendance here today. We'll be taking a lot of this on board. We've got you to write on post-it notes and index cards in different ways, and we have been listening. We're going to write a report on what we've heard, on what you've said. Oh my goodness. I've got a lot of people to thank today. With this report, we're hopefully, I would like to see this being developed in some sort of policy. And we'll be working with our partner organisations into looking to develop that further and to lobby government to start taking this on and start looking at a more comprehensive approach to deal with the past. That's all I want to say. I would like to thank a lot of people, though. Conferences don't just appear. They take a lot of money and a lot of people behind the scenes. I'd like to thank Sarah and Kate from Healing Through Remembering and Emer, who have been supportive. I'd like to thank the Commission, in particular Peter and Adrian, who have been supportive all the way, and Neil and Alana. We've had help from some Queen's students here today, Jordan, Rachel, Lauren and Shannon. There's a lot of people to thank. In the Queen's Law School, we've had Declan, who everybody's been emailing, and he's been running after me and trying to do things for me. Susie and Susan. Richard has been on camera, and these people all just have done this voluntary, so they have. At the Transitional Justice Institute, I'd like to thank Brandon, Monica, Susan for chairing, who's not just Transitional Justice, but thank you all for chairing. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you for attending. I know it's a miserable day outside. It's very difficult to park to Queen's. I know I have to park. I think it's somewhere near Islamabad or something. It's really far away from Queen's, but I really appreciate you making the effort here to come down today. If there's anything further, please do get in contact with us, get in contact with me, get in contact with the Commission, Healing Through Remembering. We're here to advance this conversation. It's something I really care about, and it annoys me to go to a conference and nothing happens. I want to see this progressed, and there's something to happen. And I think there's potential at the moment to re-engage and start looking at these issues in both a legal, political and constitutional way that rethinks on how we deal with the past. And I hope there's some momentum there. I think today, people's attention and your attendance today, that there is. And so we live in hope, but we need to drive the political will there forward. So thank you very much, and I hope you get home safe.